All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today I have the honor of moderating a discussion about the Light in the Piazza, the novella, and the musical, with an incredible panel that includes Tony Award-winning composer Adam Guettel, includes the director of Southern Studies, Dr. McKee, includes artist in residence with us this semester, Blake McIver, and alumna Mary Donnelly Haskell. We are in for an absolute treat. I want to give a little context. About a year ago, the seed was planted about doing the Light in the Piazza at the University of Mississippi, the flagship institution, in celebration of Elizabeth Spencer, Mississippi's very own writer, in celebration of her 100th birthday. The moment that was put out into the atmosphere, stars started aligning. For example, reached out to Katie and Afton at Southern Studies, and in our conversation, the center was already acting as a sponsor for an event happening at the Library of America, where the Adam Guettel was interviewed and part of that panel. So fast forward, here we are today in Oxford on the University of Mississippi campus, and because of the partnership between Music and Center for Southern Study, we are able to have the Adam Guettel with us. So let's give a little warm welcome.
Thanks for having me. You can drop the article before.
No, I have to have it, because I imagine that it puts like a cape on the back of you, and you're like flying through the air.
Capes.
So unless you really force me to remove it, it might stay. It might stay. No, but I really was excited to start this talk off with the two of you, because Elizabeth Spencer, super accomplished, but the thing she's probably most known for is this novella. Would you agree, Katie?
Yes.
Yes? And I guess we'll start off. Adam, what was your first introduction to the novella?
Well, I was talking to my mom because I had just finished something else, and I said I wanted to do a love story because I didn't think there had been anything like that was sort of an unbridled sound like that in quite a while in a theater in New York, at least that I knew of. And I said I was looking for a love story, but that was sort of off axis, something that wasn't tied up in a bow. And she said, well, years ago I proposed to your grandfather that he do something called The Light in the Piazza, which was in the New Yorker, and he and Oscar actually thought about it pretty seriously, but they ultimately rejected the idea, and maybe you should read it. And I did, and I thought, I was pretty absorbed. I took a lot of notes in the margins, and I haven't read it since. I don't know if that's good or bad, but for me it's important because I want, when I write something, to be in the position of the audience, so that the story, as it unfolded to me the first time I read it, what felt musical, what felt like it could be compressed into song and lifted into gesture, I would be in the same position as a writer as the audience would be receiving the piece, and if those inciting energy can somehow resonate with the receiving energy, then maybe that's a very clean way to go about something. So I didn't do a lot of layering on and extra reading and researching, and never saw the movie, and that was my first introduction to the story.
So from the moment you were first introduced to the book to when you actually wrote it, what was the span of time?
I guess we got it on at around 3 years, when we got it on at the Intiman.
Got it.
That was the first iteration of the show, and I think that was 2003. And then it went to the Goodman and sort of wound its way east slowly in increasingly larger spaces. And then we got to the Vivian Beaumont in 2005.
And I just want to give context in case anyone here isn't aware. When he's referencing his grandfather, we're talking about Richard Rodgers.
So it wouldn't be the Richard Rodgers?
And that's where I'm going. We have you here under your accomplishments. So you are the Adam Guettel.
Well, now that I've eclipsed him, I guess it's fine.
But I'm very select. It's intentional.
Yeah, okay.
Do know, it's intentional. So Katie, I'm curious, as a literary scholar, as someone who studies the South, how does it resonate on you to hear that the composer read the book once and then goes? I mean, How does that translate to you?
It's okay. I think that's fine. I mean, when a work leaves the hands of an author, it belongs to the reader, and the reader has as much purchase then on that story as the author does.
I love that. I love that.
That for it to become an experience then for you, that becomes an experience for other people. I think that's how it works. I think that's how stories move, and I think is okay.
I love that so much because in my mind that translates, and hopefully we get to this when we get with Mary and Blake, because then when you're the artist interpreting what even the composer lyricist has put on the page, then how you then transcend and share that with your audience. And I think sometimes performers can get premeditated on what they want their audience, what they want the response to be, but you don't have control over that. You just share and then let it be. Yeah. So I'm curious, do you have any preconceived notions or any, judgment's the wrong word, but thoughts on when something is transformed into a film or a stage work?
Well, as a reader, then, because I am also a reader, then I probably have built the world of that story in my head as a reader. So sometimes then when I go to see the movie or the stage adaptation, it doesn't match the world in my head. That doesn't make it wrong. It's just a variation on what I had imagined. I have seen the movie. I saw the movie first, actually, and then later read it. So I was shaped in kind of reverse order.
Well, I'll admit, I didn't know much about Elizabeth Spencer. I'm going to confess, I just did not. And I'm grateful for, you creating this musical, because then that serves as the gateway for someone like myself or other people in here into her. And that's just such a gift. So thank you for doing that.
She was really an amazing person. And obviously so accomplished.
So accomplished. Just a little context for those who don't know who Elizabeth Spencer was. Born in 1921, Carrollton, Mississippi. Studied at Belhaven. Had some inspiration with Eudora Welty. Went on to get master's at Vanderbilt. And has a marker on the Mississippi Writers Trail. That happened in 2019. And here we are in 2021 celebrating the 100th year of her birth. And I'm going to give a plug, hoping folks, whether you're here or watching, that you'll attend the production of the Light in the Piazza at the Ford Center November 19th and 21st, because some magic is happening here on campus. And you're going to get to work with our cast in a little bit.
And I can't wait. I really can't. It's more fun than anything.
We're excited.
Because I've already written it. That's the best thing about it.
So no edits will be happening on the spot, right?
No.
Well, there was one note last night
there's
at
one
dinner.
we
There
might
was one.
do a little snip here and there.
Little bit. So let's talk a little bit about other Southern writers, or why do you think Elizabeth Spencer hasn't risen to the top in terms of Southern writers? Do either of you have an opinion on that? Or am I just ignorant? It's possible.
I think that's true. That
I'm ignorant?
I think she is. No. Definitely not that part. I don't think she quite gets her due. I think that's true. And I think there are probably several reasons for that. She was writing kind of in a second wave of the Southern literary Renaissance. And so there are a number of women writers who come along at that period of time. Mm-hmm. The Renaissance itself had been established primarily by male writers, Faulkner. So there's that. She wrote a lot of short fiction. I mean, she has a number of novels too, but she wrote a lot of short fiction. So sometimes people don't maybe know that as well. I think a lot of it is that a good bit of her work is not set in the South, and that doesn't make it, to my mind, less a Southern story. But it is, a lot of it is set in Italy, and she actually said, I read something that she said that sort of stuck with me, which is that everybody has a second country, and Italy was her second country. Sometimes people have to imagine their second country, she said.
That.
But she actually went to hers and was able to write about the South more clearly, I think, from Italy, and then to write about Italy more clearly when she came back to the United States. But I think she's overlooked. I think that there's more people should read Elizabeth Spencer, and maybe now they will.
Now they will.
In our culture, I think also, yes, and a very crass and surfacey addition I might make is that the name Eudora Welty is actually just a very charismatic sound. It's just kind of euphonic and feels literary, specific, smart. And when you're glossing over the New York Review of Books or whatever, you see there's a book by someone named Eudora Welty or like Elizabeth Spencer. I know it's sort of crass to say, but I think that's a small part of it. Fame comes also from cheesy things like that.
It's a valid point. I'm curious, you talked about the love story, Adam, in The Light in the Piazza, and there's so many layers and so much intricacy, and one of the things I enjoy about her writing is her take on the female woman experience, different from potentially other writers of that time. Did that draw you in any way? Can you speak in your own way to that in terms of your take on the piece?
Well, for some reason, I almost uniformly have female leads. My shows have very important parts for women. Maybe that's because I had a very strong role model in my mother, who was an author and a composer and had 5 kids, and so the female voice, and it was not a foreign land for me. It just felt like a wonderful place to explore, and also not especially female as opposed to myself or male or whatever. I don't always think of her in that way. I just think of her as a human being who has a really tough predicament and works through it in as it's written by Elizabeth in an almost Mandarin style. There's a kind of withheld quality to Elizabeth Spencer's work in The Light in the Piazza, which is a wonderful invitation for the sort of sublingual addition of music. The resolution of music is both inarticulate but also infinite. There's, and that's sort of what I like about it. You can get away with a lot with music that you can't with language. Mm-hmm. And I thought there was tons of room in the novel through Margaret's character and through Clara's character. Clara is not, in my view, to be relegated to someone who's just kind of special. She's a universal representative to me, of how we all feel. Actually, even at every point in our lives, there's a quality that Clara has, which is standing on the precipice, on the very edge of emotional ambition, looking at this thing which can be chalked up to a biological imperative or a deep spiritual need that we all have to make connection. And Clara is arrested there, so she's always active in that way. And I thought that was beautifully invited by Elizabeth Spencer in terms of what I might add with music.
Yeah, and you do it amazingly. Speaking of that, want to move towards the musical side. So I want to thank you, Katie, for sharing with us and being part of the panel and being a great partner.
It's nice to meet
and
you.
I want to invite Blake and Mary to come up.
I'll let Blake take them. Thank you so much.
So, Blake and Mary, I just mentioned, tiny thing of how they're connected to the university right now, but their deep connection to this show goes way back. Blake as a producer and has performed Fabrizio, and in that same production,
11
Mary,
years ago.
you were
It's hard to
Margaret.
believe. Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
so we get to have them in this production here. Blake manning the ship, steering this thing as director. So I wanted to pull you in and dive into your impressions. Just to segue from what we were just talking about. What is Elizabeth Spencer? What is she saying to you?
Oh, good. Well,
Do you wanna go?
Sure. I actually shared with Adam earlier that I can count, on one hand, less than, the times I've been in a theater and even actually, Adam, I forgot to say this, we were a fan of the movie as well prior. Olivia de Havilland was the original Margaret, and a baby Yvette Mimieux was Clara. And so my family had actually loved the movie, but when I sit in an audience and am overwhelmed with a connection to a character, to leave and say, not just I want to play that character, I must play her one day, I hope. I'm gonna, I just wrap it up and put it away somewhere in my chest of hopes as an actress. And that's what overwhelmed me the first time I certainly saw it on Broadway, and again heard just these melodies of, they were so musical and so lush, and yet just kind of dug right into my heart. And I've used the term my mother's heart. I have a daughter. I have a daughter and a son, but there's obviously a unique relationship between a mother and a daughter. And what you captured there in the spirit of some of the tunes, and again, I hope you all will come on the 19th or the 21st to see the production, because you'll understand what Adam's alluding to. I just was overwhelmed with a connection to the spirit of Margaret and to her heart and to her hopes.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty modest role to take on in terms of potential audience's perception of you, because you are behaving and fully inhabiting a role in which it can easily be assessed that you're doing the wrong thing,
Yes.
and that's one of the things that's not tied up in a bow about it, and I think that's a really fun proposition for an actor, but not one that many actors are willing to take on. I mean, not to relegate actors to some sort of subhuman, whatever. I mean, but I think we all are performers on some level, and we want to be liked. I mean, that's partly why we're doing it. I don't think anyone becomes a performer so they can be disliked.
Right.
Yeah, we don't go for the boobs, right?
You're right. So when she oversteps, when she does some of the choices Margaret makes, I found interesting that when in our 3-week production in Los Angeles, it got extended, and I found it interesting how people would come up after Adam, and I'm sure in your long run in Broadway, you saw that it's so depended on that person's reality, right? What they brought into the theater, be it their mother, be it their sister, be it the dad who's whatever their, I'm going to use the word, whatever their baggage, right? Their personal journey, that's how the show hit them. And then, so it resonates from that post, from that guidepost. So then your conversation with them after the show can be absolutely unique and to their perception. And that's the mark of a great gift you give the audience.
There was a wonderful moment for me, just quickly, I'll report on this. We were in Chicago heading east, and at the Goodman, there's a wide staircase that sort of bifurcates the lobby and goes up to the mezzanine. And after the show, I was behind the staircase. It was the kind where it was a modern staircase. You could sort of see in between the stairs, that kind of thing. And so I'm over there, and these 3 people are coming down, and I start to realize it's 2 parents and their daughter. And I couldn't quite tell what was going on, but I started to notice that the daughter was upset, or that they were holding her, and began to dawn on me that maybe she had special needs of some kind. And when I rounded and looked back, she was beaming with tears. I mean, just beaming with a huge smile and a reddened face and tears. And I ended up speaking to her parents very briefly, and they said she was so happy to see a love story where somebody had some issues the way she did it, and it always brings me to kind of like a point of it's just it was a lovely thing to see, and so just to dovetail what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm curious, speaking of one's own trajectory and perspective, as a Southern woman. I mean, how does that influence your take on Margaret?
Well-
and how do you walk that line of it getting too personal to personal enough? Can you speak
Blake
to
and I
that?
talked about this so much way back when, again, 11 years ago, when we first addressed it, especially because the run was in Los Angeles, right? So what it will mean to the audiences that come to the Ford Center will be a little different from what we were projecting, in North Hollywood, California.
They're different?
And exactly.
They're different?
Slight.
But what was interesting is, as you say, as a Southern woman,
Yeah.
again, for me to sit in the audience and go, I know her. And I shared that with Adam earlier. I just watched Margaret, and be it a compilation of women in my life and people that have crossed my life, I know her. And so and Blake, thank goodness you had a connection to the South, because your mother's from Houston, and because you had family in the South, you kind of took in these characters in that way as well. They didn't need to be caricatures.
Right.
Which
Which is
could
important,
kind
right?
of, again, if you're casting in Los Angeles, you're kind of trying to go, guys, these are real people, flawed, emotional, many things, many adjectives, but they're real people. So let's step back and assess that and do it that way.
And people were so excited just to get to have the opportunity to do the material, because in 2009 it had only been done, I think, one other time in the LA regional area. And I threw the casting notice out and booked a studio at the Debbie Reynolds studios there in North Hollywood. And the day we auditioned Clara's, I had 85 girls in the hallway
Wow.
that showed up to the call, like desperate to get their hands on this material.
Yeah, and sing this music.
And coming back to it now, years later, and coming to it for the first time as a director, the thing that struck me the most, the musical is my first exposure to the material. So then I went back and read the book, and went back and saw the movie. But for me, what struck me the most, and as we're talking about Elizabeth Spencer as well as the musical, is how there is a way in which she writes an emotional arc first, and the plot follows. And Adam did such a brilliant job musically of infusing the emotional arcs into the actual musical structure of the score, and then the pieces fall together. And that struck me so much when I went back and read the book. I was like, oh, that is how I experienced the score for the first time. It took me by the hook emotionally, and then.
Wow. Now, how do you respond to that?
Elizabeth Spencer wrote a book in which all of those things are just completely embedded. It struck me when I read it that it's there are four couples, the principals, there are four couples, 8 principals, and their relationships put each of those characters on a continuum somewhere. At one end is the sort of ecstatic bloom of first love, where Clara and Fabrizio are. And at the other end is this sort of dusty, desiccated, done relationship that Margaret and Roy are going through, and that the other two couples are somewhere in the middle on that continuum. And furthermore, that the music for that first ecstatic bloom is the same music as losing it, of not having it anymore. Because it's so primal and so universally important to all of us. And the music is just contextualized differently. It's the same sound in our heart, in our ears, at least to me. And the bet that I made was that everyone in the audience would be on that continuum somewhere too.
Yes.
Perhaps many, divorces were announced at intermission. I don't know.
Jeez.
I don't know. I love
Hopefully
that,
that's
though.
not happening here, but I don't know.
It's true. Specifically, there's a song, The Beauty Is. And so Clara sings it just kind of so wide open, and then Margaret does the reprise. And I love using the term, Adam, I don't know how you feel about this. You use the anecdote of the couples. So they're, the son and daughter-in-law to the Italian couple are they are spoken dysfunction and angst between them, right? But Margaret, but we all know, sometimes there's unspoken brokenness, right? And I love that you give the audience that. The audience sees innocent love and kind of volatile, like I'm gonna tell you, that kind of thing, broken relationship. And then the subtlety, which is, again, maybe it's going back to Southern Woman.
Yeah.
Boy, how it just sits there for what can happen sometimes. And I remember, I'm going to use this real quickly, there was another, we all have our Elizabeth Spencer kind of quotes, and I'm going to paraphrase because I certainly can't quote her appropriately, but she was talking with someone about, was this character, you think it was you, somehow kind of slightly based on you. And she said, well, had I not followed my dreams and gotten out and stayed in Mississippi, it could have been me in a, I'm trying to think of the exact word she used, but, kind of satisfied, and then there's a big, or unsatisfied, right? It's that staying there and settling. I think that may have been the term, that would you settle for a life? And there was kind of that hint to me that she gave Margaret. You certainly present Margaret musically, how she kind of finds her voice. It's not that she didn't always have it, of course she did. But in her reality, where she lived in Winston-Salem, it wasn't heard. And here in Italy, you just kind of let her.
And I think you speak to the kind of Augustinian tradition. She's confessing, Spencer through Margaret is confessing in retrospect how this felt to her, and gets into really complex, subtle, and withheld emotional dynamics. Craig Lucas, who wrote the very good book, meaning libretto for this piece, he just did a wonderful job. He understood Spencer's cadence extremely well. He certainly read it a lot, and drew liberally from the book, which is what he should do. And in scenes like the phone calls with Roy, the sort of the trepidation, the sort of small skirmishes, all within the mores of the time. The subtlety of those phone calls they're so well wrought by Craig, because they give us some space to contemplate the story in a very different temperature, a very different density. And
I want to share two things from my perspective that I love so much about this piece of work, in whatever form it is, that it deals so much with the self and the society. And it's going back to what you were saying, how one fits within. And I think sometimes there can be the perception when a show is set in the 1950s that that's what was happening then and it's not relevant now. And what I find so compelling with this, and as I was watching you the other day at the end of rehearsal, this is so relevant for now, for 2021. And I mean, individuals, male, female, whoever, humankind still going through these moments of growth and struggle about how one fits within the societal structure of where they are. And I promise you, if you've not experienced this, you really have a very personal experience in the midst of this production. Whether, obviously you as Margaret, you as the director, but as the audience, it's just so profound to me how it hits that nail on the head to make one reflect, okay, myself and what's around me. What am I satisfied with?
That was
what
my
am I
point. It
not
hits you where
satisfied
you
with?
are.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Individual audience members, it hits them where they are, very much the family you've shared the story with.
Yeah.
It resonated with what their story was.
Yeah.
I love that.
So speaking of 2021,
Yes.
I think your take on the production is very innovative. I think it is compelling. Would you share a bit with us?
Absolutely. Well, what strikes me the most about the story is its intimacy, and you talk about putting this intimate piece on a giant lush
By the way, I
stage
drove at him by the Ford Center yesterday, and he's like, "How many seats are in there?" You know,
in a huge hall. And so for me, that's the exciting challenge, right? Is to draw the audience in, and we're doing a lot with projection mapping. We're doing a lot with not big brick and mortar sets being wheeled on and off. Everything's sort of scaled in, not down, but focused.
I like how you said that, scaled in.
It's really exciting because, especially with the 5-piece orchestration, we've got the orchestra right in the pit right in front of them. We've got the cast. I mean, it's staged almost on the apron, so to speak. Because that was one of the things I shared yesterday with Adam about what struck me with the original Broadway production of the Beaumont. It's a big Broadway house, but it felt so intimate. The way the thrust was used, the way bringing the audience into these characters in a specific and intimate way, even though we're going to be in a large venue.
So how many seats are there?
It's 1250.
I was going to say 1,200. Yeah.
Well, that's bigger than the Beaumont.
Yeah.
And we had, 15 in the pit at the Beaumont, so this ought to be.
We'll try to make sure we pop you in there so you can see it while you're
Can't
there.
wait.
See the space.
So that's been the joy, and that's been the wonderful challenge. I think of this piece as so asymmetrical in so many ways, and I've tried to stage it accordingly. And I love that it's not. I love that there's nothing straightforward about it. I love that all of these couples are in a different spot in their realities, and to be able to feel that in a way. Parts of the show I even love the sort of obtuse nature of certain pieces of the actual tangible moving parts, and so it's been a joy to imagine it in that way.
So I'm curious, we have I hope this comes out right, multi-generational cast in the sense that we have students that are undergrads, we have graduate students, we have alumni, Mary and another individual, Calvin Ellis, in this production, and then your father is going to be in the production. How, as a director, do you navigate?
We stunt cast Roy.
We did stunt cast Roy.
But I'm thinking of the students, not to say that they aren't, experienced, but it's a different point in one's trajectory of life experiences. How has that been for you to navigate as a director?
Well, for me, it's been really fun, to whittle it down to the easiest. It's fun and exciting for me because everybody in the cast kind of has had a different life of experience, and as far as some of our cast is doing their first musical because they're in the music department and they've done opera or they've done scene work but not a full musical. So we've got all of that from that to all the way professional,
performed all over the world,
accomplished artists. So that is exciting, and I love doing that, and I've done that before a lot in LA when I was producing years ago. I loved to combine. I hated to even use amateur and professional, but literally amateur cast and professional cast together because I think we can learn so much from each other.
100%.
And building, especially at the collegiate level here, building the beginnings of careers and just letting people see what is possible.
Instead of it being a hypothetical, instead of being, this is what it's going to be like, no, here it is.
And Mary talking to the students on week 2, saying, I sat right where you sat. I was a music major. And then here is where my career has taken me. Here's where the path has taken me. Like, you are on the precipice right now. And to be able to do a piece of work that's this intricate and beautiful and rich it's a blessing.
I'd like to say it's like a good cast iron skillet. You have some unseasoned and you have some well seasoned, right? To go for a Southern reference.
In case anyone was concerned about the authenticity of the Southern woman.
I would be the well seasoned cast iron skillet.
They're the best.
Yes, they are. Thank you so much.
And how mind-boggling, because it is mind-boggling to me that we have Adam here to really share and explore. I mean, I was just so impressed when I reached out to you how I instantly felt this connection with you, your graciousness, your commitment, to teaching is just, and sharing is just so exciting.
It's a big it's a necessary cantilever for me. Writing is a solitary thing and often unremunerated, and teaching is always remunerated. I mean, it's compensation is immediate and lasting, and I just love being around people. Plus the ego. I mean, you called and I was like, an interview?
And I kept saying, the Adam Guettel, is this really the? No, okay.
Well, I guess no one understands better the kind of generational, the meaning of legacy, right? In be it musical theater, be it performance, be it composition. Gosh, you understand it, and for you to understand the power you have to plant seeds, in the next generation.
One hopes, and just in the trying to do it, it's that's enough. You can't always be sure that you have, but.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, Adam. So, what are your first impressions of Oxford, Mississippi, and the University of Mississippi? Just curious.
It's enormous and completely cohesive. I mean, it's a little bit like St. Petersburg or something, but brick. It just sort of seems like the whole thing works, and it all relates. It's I don't know. It's like Le Corbusier went on a date with, I don't know, whoever Peter the Great's favorite architects were.
There you go. Well, you've had some firsts since arriving, right? Do you want to, some firsts? The first viewing of kudzu.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I didn't quite know the word, what you were saying. Yeah, kudzu was the first, cotton was the first, the iridescent cotton. I'd never seen it before, growing. And then, what was the other one? Oh,
do we want to mention it?
Chick-fil-A, I've never had that. And I have to
Reach out to them to
say,
sponsor the show. No.
that's good. I can only imagine that people around here are very sad on Sundays because they don't serve on Sundays. That's a good sandwich.
So I heard this yesterday. I was like, is he kidding? Is he serious? But no, it's just interesting when you go to a new area, right? What are your firsts?
Yeah.
Okay, we may have to slip catfish in there at some point.
Okay. I'll do it.
So I'm curious. It's a question for the three of you. I'm going to paraphrase it differently for each of you. Adam, what one thing do you wish people would ask you about the Light in the Piazza?
Gosh, I guess there's a lot for me that's important around the idea of the specific being universal, and that in the context of our society now, a story which could be perceived as fairly provincial, given where we are, the zeitgeist today. A southern woman of means, but perhaps limited exposure, but great intellectual capacity. Entirely white world, a sort of upper middle class, sort of kind of existence. It can be thought of as provincial and less than instructive in our time. And I would hope that any story I write, because it's so specific, will be able to transcend those boundaries and have resonance in a broader sense. And I think that's a worthy thing to have to defend, and a worthy thing to attack. So there's that.
Okay. I'm curious, Blake, as people come in to the production, not that you're forcing a response on anyone, but what is the main thing you hope that they take away from this production?
I mean, to speak on, going off of what you just said, for me what is so magnificent is that the specificity of this culture clash, and multiple culture clashes throughout the piece, resonates today. And so my goal is that at least the audience will see a reflection of themselves in one of the trajectories of story, or maybe one of the even difficult things, even the clashy things about the piece, that it will resonate with them. It definitely resonated with me when I first saw it, and I think that's the beauty of the piece. And my goal is to facilitate that for them and not lead the witness, so to speak, to let them, to not be too heavy-handed. So my goal from the beginning is to sort of make it look like it wasn't directed. Like they can just receive the piece, and I can be that I haven't gotten in the way, that I have not colored the piece in any way.
So there's no witness tampering or intimidation?
And I'm curious for you, Mary, if you're willing to share, what's the hardest part for you personally in being Margaret? And I didn't say playing Margaret, it's being Margaret.
Yeah.
What's the hardest for you, if you're willing to share?
Well, I think that the authenticity, right, that needs to reside with the cast, with each one of the relationships that the audience is privy to seeing Margaret build. She arrives in Italy with her relationship, be it whatever adjective you want to use to describe it, because some will think maybe she's a little overbearing. Some will think, oh, she's just being cautious, again. But I find it's interesting, and I hope that, maybe at the end, if somebody's going to say, I felt like I was just kind of in the piazza observing, right? You brought me in, and I was just getting to be a tad voyeuristic, in watching this woman of passion and hope and struggle and frustration and disappointment. I hope that they feel all of that with her journey.
And I think a very brief but important moment is also when you and Signor Naccarelli go in for a kiss. Sometimes we would, because it speaks to this active account that we all have. Your marriage is falling apart. It's very depressing, very painful. Your daughter is in that first flush of the potential, but you don't know if you're being irresponsible to give her leave to pursue that. And also in a kind of subtle, wonderful, magical, quiet way, you're pursuing it a little bit yourself. When we first did it, they would kiss, and then after the kiss, he would have walked her home. He exits, and she would quietly wipe the kiss off, as if to say, this is all part of my strategy to get him to say, okay, my son can marry your daughter. But eventually that went by the wayside, probably because Vicki Clark knew better, but it shouldn't be that explicit. It's, it is strategy, and it's also a real justifiable and legitimate emotional thing. But she's a mercenary, she's a poet.
That's what I can't believe you're saying this. One of the, as I said, the relationships that the audience gets to see her develop. I so agree with that, because I feel as though, again, Margaret being a Southern woman, she knows what the end game is. She knows where she wants to end up. And so, as every good Southern woman may want to do, she thinks in the duet that Margaret sings with Signor, it's Let's Walk. And I love to imagine that again, oh, well, I know, and I'll do this, and and at the end of it, she feels, she thinks, she arrives at, aha, all right. And then I agree, I felt the kiss was a surprise, was like, oh, wait, no, I had this totally under control, and all of a sudden it isn't.
Yeah.
And I so agree with that, absolutely. So, what does the audience see in her eyes and in her breath as she kind of gathers herself? And
I love the idea that it's happening contemporaneously. In other words, the idea that it is both emotionally valid and important to her, and possibly a potentially successful strategy, is all happening for the 2 seconds her lips are against his.
Exactly.
A lot going on in those 2 seconds.
Yeah, just, as my daughter says, so many things, right? So many feels.
Yeah, so many feels.
As the kids say.
So curious, in the writing of the show, and I'm sure in the directing, how do you make us embrace Clara and process her before we actually get all of the information. How do you navigate that?
Well, there's only one way to navigate that, I think, with this particular piece, and it's to just find the truth in everybody's reaction to her, because that is the guide map for the audience. That is, they will respond to her how they respond to her, but how all the other characters in the piece respond to her. That's finding the truth in all of those moments.
Can I insert something
Yes.
here, because I'm actually incorporating this work into a course I teach in the Honors College and using this as a vehicle to talk and teach about self and society. And what you just said is so important, because getting people to be empathetic, to step into shoes, and I think what you just said of how each character, each person responds to her, I'm hoping that's a lesson people can take from this show. Taking that moment of less judgment, but that moment of being in the shoes, instead of why is Margaret being so protective, or why is, but it's like, I think this piece successfully takes to that point where you're like, wait, I need to have pause.
Right.
I don't know where that person is. I don't know the full story. And I think in today's society,
Right.
we're so quick to jump, come to a conclusion, cancel culture, all that stuff, instead of that moment of pause. And how cool is it that a piece, a story from set in the 50s, published in the 60s, coming out in early 2000 can really serve this purpose today. Am I making sense?
Yes,
Or have
and when
I
I-
gone too off kilter?
When I reread,
I'm passionate about it.
When I reread the libretto, knowing that I was coming to do this, and I
Yeah.
hadn't read the libretto in 10 years, and seeing it after everything that our world has been through in the
Yes.
past 2 years. And I was just reading through it, just going through it with a fine-tooth comb to see what I thought about it now. And when I got to Margaret's line in the final scene with Roy on the phone, when she says, "Why can't we hope for once instead of dreading everything?" I burst out into tears. Now that line didn't hit me like that in 2009. It didn't hit me like that in 2005.
Right.
Well, it's well understood why it might hit you now.
And it just cut me like a knife, and I thought, oh, well, if that's the thesis thought in presenting it in 2021, then that's something I can really emotionally wrap around.
Right. Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. That's a pretty cool thing.
No, it's good. I want to open the floor. Does anyone in here have a question that they would like to ask of our esteemed guests? Oh,
I love it.
okay. Abby's going to pull it up, but I just want to open it up. We appreciate that you're here.
Yes.
Go for it,
Right.
sir.
I think I did it earlier, but as you know, when you're creating a piece, you have your truth and story that you want to tell that piece, and also we talked about the translation of the artist with that piece and making it their own. I mean, how do you balance telling your story, but also having the artist performing that? Get what you're saying, but craft it in their own way, if I'm making sense.
It makes sense. I mean, the idea of my truth, I don't really operate from that place. I don't consider my truth to be necessarily all that truthful, whatever. It's like...
That's a true statement.
What I'm trying to say is that I really want to find out how the characters, as Elizabeth has written them, and how she's hung this story together, carefully orchestrated this matrix, this community, who are all telling the story together, how I can bring that into the sharpest relief and maybe the most memorable. I always, if I can get to know these characters well enough, whatever my bedraggled truth is gets in there somehow, it's like... And then in terms of the artist performing it, I've always felt maybe too, doctrinaire by current standards, but I think a score is not like a blueprint. Some people kind of like, oh yeah, the terrific guidelines you put there in that score. It's like, those aren't guidelines, those are the notes. And I took a long time figuring out what they are and how long they should last and what register they sit in and what words go with them and things like that. All very fancy and la-di-da, but I also think that every note is a vessel. It is a small chalice or thimble, that actors, performers, and players and conductors pour themselves into. So it is a very complex relationship and a very active one. There's no hierarchy there, but I don't know that we have. I sort of want to say, well, if you want to change it or really mess around with it, then maybe you should be a composer. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit snooty of me, but I do think that there is a division of labor in the process that we go through. So I want the performers to absolutely fill out these vessels in every way that they bring with their signature and their thumbprint.
No, I like that. I tell my students all the time, you're a detective. You need to really, what is on the page?
Yeah.
Dig deep into it. You can't put your mark until you know what's actually there. Well, Abby, did you think of your question?
Okay, so my question was, what character do you relate to the most personally? And if you can't find a character that you relate to most personally,
I can come up with an answer to the first half, and you'll remember the second half.
That's a good question.
That's a good question. I'd have to say Clara. The reason I wrote the piece was Clara. I understand that Margaret is the lens of the piece and the MC, really, and the sort of master of ceremonies, and our bridge to the storytelling. But the engine of the score has to be Clara. As I mentioned before, she's positioned right on the edge of what she really wants, what she might have, but it just seems so foreign, but there it is, and it absolutely suffuses her. And that is the sound of the score, and so everybody relates to that sound in some way. So Margaret leads us through the piece, but Clara is she's the character I relate to.
okay. The second part of that question was, if you could find a character, what character did you pick to represent as a person in your life? Not as yourself, but like maybe family, friends, acquaintances.
I think I stayed within the province of the story as Elizabeth set it out and how I needed to make adjustments to put it on the stage. You do have to take these things apart a little bit and try to figure out how to make them work as a theater piece. And some things need to be de-emphasized and some things need to be embellished. This is a little bit off the track of your question, but a good example of that kind of embellishment is if I'm going to create a musical structure which in some ways shadows what Elizabeth made, where there are four couples and they're all on this continuum somewhere, I need to give Franca a little bit more specificity in terms of, she's wonderfully written. We did sort of method composing and writing for her, and I suggested that song, The Joy You Feel, where she begins being a perfectly good potential sister-in-law to Clara. And sort of against her will, or even unexpectedly out of her comes this, because we all want to be good, but sometimes something takes us over. And I don't think that moment was in the book. I think I made that, and we needed to give some shrift. Is there anything but short shrift? Is it long shrift? Longer shrift to Franca and Giuseppe, and to try to musicalize in some way what Margaret and Signor Naccarelli have together. Some of those things take a little math and a little what would work, And anyway, I hope that kind of got in there a little.
Well, I want to thank the Center for Southern Studies for allowing us this opportunity to talk in this manner and to dive into more of the book aspect. Tonight, we're going to do an LMR Live from that auditorium in person or watching via the live stream. We're going to focus more on music and other aspects of your life.
Oh boy.
I haven't asked yet what's off the table, but we'll get there. And I want to say that this piece, in my opinion, to add on to, it's an opportunity to see how it correlates to your life, to see how it correlates to the world around us. And I think it's an opportunity to also break down stereotypes and presumptions that we have. And that's something that I want to commend Dr. McKee about with what she's doing with the Center for Southern Studies. I think there's sometimes a real preconceived notion of what the South is. I'm not a native Southerner. I'm now a child of Mississippi, I call myself. I've been adopted by being here and thankful for that. But we need to break away from those stereotypes, and this piece really serves as a vehicle for that. And I want to again say I commend Dr. McKee for what she's doing with the Center for Southern Study and Afton Thomas and all those folks, and sincerely appreciate you being here. And one last plug that we hope you will come to the show November 19th and 21st in the glorious Ford Center. You'll get to experience firsthand the exquisite, masterful artistry that you've created, Adam. You will get to experience the vision of an incredible director and the artistry of the amazing Mary Donnelly and the rest of the cast. It's going to be something to really behold and experience, and I'm proud that the University of Mississippi, the flagship institution, is doing this production in celebration of Elizabeth. So thank you.
So proud.